introduce this excellent group of folks. They, as you can see by the picture behind us, they took over a journal called Strategic Affairs and made it all about Russian foreign policy. So together with the Georgetown University Center for Eurasian, Russian, East European Studies, we're really happy to welcome them to talk about what they wrote about and also to take your questions about the broad range of Russian foreign policy topics. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Alexander Lukin, and we'll go from there.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm Alexander Lukin. I head the International Relations Department at the High School of Economics, which is one of the largest Russian universities in Moscow. And I also was the editor, or as they say, as they call it, guest editor, for the special issue of Russia and Global Affairs of the journal Strategic Analysis. The journal is Indian. It's edited in India and published, and is published in the United Kingdom. Well, why is it Indian? Because I think in the current atmosphere, it would be kind of problematic to publish anything like that in the United States or Britain. But luckily we have India, which is both independent and an English-speaking, at least partially English-speaking country. So that's why we agreed with an influential think tank in India, which is actually a military under the defense ministry, and to publish a special issue completely devoted to various aspects of Russia's foreign policy. So the special issue presents, here's the contents of it and how it looks, if you have not seen the journal, which is actually the most influential Indian journal on foreign affairs. So the special issue presents Russia's view of the emerging new international order and Russia's place in it. The articles of the issue are not concentrated on the particularities of Russia's foreign policy towards specific countries or regions as such. Rather, they present a comprehensive view of leading Russia's foreign policy experts. Some of them are here. Totally, there are 12 articles and 13 authors. And we have 5 of them here. So they present a comprehensive view of leading Russia's foreign policy experts on the structure of the new international order, major international tendencies and problems, and Russia's place in this system. Particular articles discuss Russia's approaches to international security, new factors of influence in the modern world, Russia and the system of global governance, Russia and the new economic order, Russia's role in Eurasian integration and its policy of pivot to Asia, within the context of similar policies by other major international players. The main question which the authors discuss is whether Russia has enough resources to achieve its goal of becoming a separate power center within the new post-bipolar system, or it will have to lean either to the West or China. While there may be some differences in opinions of Russian authors, they generally belong to one school of thought, which is institutionally associated with several influential think tanks and universities. As I said, the High School of Economics, particularly the Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs, the Valdai Discussion Club, which is a think tank which works closely with the presidential administration and where President Putin often speaks Council on Foreign and Defense Policy, and Russia in Global Affairs Journal, which is probably the most influential Russian journal on international affairs. So the political position of this school can generally be defined as centrist, which in the Russian context means criticizing both excessively pro-Western and extremely nationalist tendencies and proposals, and supporting Russia's moderately independent course. The articles by Russian authors are divided into three sections. Authors in the first section, Russia in the Changing International System, address the general framework of post-Soviet Russian foreign policy, its main achievements and problems. The informal leader of the centrist school, Dean of the Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs at High School of Economics, and honorary chairman of the Council on Foreign and Defense Policy, Dr. Sergei Karaganov, discusses the evolution of Moscow's foreign policy course against the background of new major trends in global and regional developments in international affairs. The editor of influential journal Russia in Global Affairs and the chairman of the presidium of the same Council on Foreign and Defense Policy, Fyodor Lukyanov, discusses the 25 years that have passed after the Cold War and the unstable international order which has been created after that. An influential politician, parliamentarian, and diplomat, Vladimir Lukin, who also happens to be my father, who was the first post-Soviet Russian ambassador to this country, devotes his article to Russia's quest for new identity after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The authors of the following section, which is called Global Challenges and Russia's Response, analyze specific factors that shape Russia's international stance. Head of the Department of World Economy at High School of Economics and former Russia's Deputy Minister of Economics and Finances Leonid Grigoriev analyzes Russia's economy. Well, he was supposed to be here, but he is lost somewhere. He's on his way, is he? Oh, okay.
It is his first time in Washington.
That's great. Well, he actually spent 5 years here at the World Bank.
Yeah, but still, it is his first time.
So, professor of the Department of International Relations at High School of Economics, Professor Maxim Bratersky, who is here on the right hand of me, analyzes the evolution of Russia's approach to national security. Associate professor at the Department of World Economy, Igor Makarov, describes in detail Russia's approaches to environmental issues. So the articles of the last section, the third one, Russia between East and West, discuss the evolution of Moscow's approaches to main international players. So, where is Mr. Suslov? Program director of Valdai Discussion Club, Dmitry Suslov, who is right here, gives a thorough picture of Moscow's stormy relationship with Washington. We must warn you that the articles, of course, were written before your presidential elections, so they're a bit dated, but we are ready to answer any questions about the new tendencies. So, director of the Center of Comprehensive European and International Studies at High School of Economics, Timofey Bordachov, explores the possibility of forming a new model of Russia's relationship with the European Union. In my own article, I argue that Russia's pivot to Asia is a long-needed and objective trend. Russia's former ambassador to Luxembourg, Mr. Mark Entin, who is right here, and with writing with his wife, who is also deputy dean at the Faculty of Economy and World Economy and International Affairs at Higher School of Economics, Ekaterina Entina. They focus on Russia's role in the emerging Greater Eurasia. Here's Andrei Skriba, lecturer at our department, draws a realistic picture of Russian strategy towards the post-Soviet space. So this collection of articles is an important manifestation of the main ideas, analysis, and policy proposals of a major influential school of Russian foreign policy thinking. Most of the authors, apart from the younger ones, were active in academic political circles in the 1990s and were were generally supportive of the course towards the integration with the West and its political and economic structures. So their turn to a more independent and national interest-oriented policy is an indication of the changing mood in the Russian academic community. So we thought here that we probably will not speak, well, each of us, because we don't have much time. We would rather answer your questions. You know what the authors who present here are doing and are writing about. So we're really interested to hear your questions and ideas about Russia, which suddenly became again a hot topic in this. Is it a city or a town? In this city, is it? Okay. Yeah.
All right, let's open it up. Please do identify yourself. Well, first wait for the microphone to come around, then identify yourself, and then ask your question. And as they've said, all topics are on the table. Please. Got the first question in front. Yep.
Peter Humphrey, I'm an intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. Russia and prior to that, Soviet Union fought very hard to bring about majority rule in South Africa. And given that long-standing tradition of several decades, how does Russia, as a government and as a people, defend the bloody support for a minority government in Syria?
Want to take a few questions and then, okay, let's take two more and then we can, so in the back.
Hi, Alex Sanchez. I'm a defense analyst, right for James Defense and some other places. My question is about Russia's foreign policy towards Latin America and the Caribbean. It used to be that Russia's best friend in the region was Venezuela with the late Hugo Chavez. Now Venezuela has effectively collapsed. So what are Russia's closest allies in the region, and what do you think Russia's foreign policy is going to be towards this area, not only in terms of weapon sales, but for example, other types of initiatives like Rosatom had some agreements with, I think, Argentina and trying to get one with Bolivia. What kind of initiatives can we expect in the next couple of years? Thank you.
And let's take one more. Kate, yeah, and
Kate Boffman, Georgetown University. I was just wondering, so if we see these cycles of the pivot towards Asia, throughout Russian history, what makes this one particularly different or successful, I guess, as you see it in the future? What differentiates it there?
okay, that's three questions. How do you gentlemen want to divide those up?
So first is Syria.
Thank you for your Syrian question. There is no doubt that the Assad regime is a bloody and brutal one, but I will answer in the following way. First, it deals with the Russian perception of the sources of terrorism and what kind of counter-terrorist policy should be pursued. The predominant Russian mainstream opinion is that terrorism is not a product of authoritarian regimes. On the contrary, in order to fight radical Islamism or terrorism successfully, what is indispensable to have is strong statehood. And yes, Assad regime is not the most perfect one, but it is incomparably better than a chaos, than, let's say, a situation in Libya, where there is no statehood, and thus those territories...
Much better than Saudi Arabia, which some countries...
Well, I mean, the question was about Syria and South, there is still no...
Minority rule.
Minority rule. Minority rule.
Minority rule.
Yeah.
Наоборот, что меньшинство возглавляет правительство.
Yeah, I mean, so let me answer this question. So it is about Russian counterterrorism strategy. Look at Chechnya, for instance. Russia considers Chechnya a successful case of counterterrorism. There are no illusions about a human rights situation in Chechnya, but it is stable and it is the most safest place nowadays in the Northern Caucasus. So to fight terrorism successful, you need a strong state. This is first point. Second point, Russian policy is not the support of Assad regime forever. Russian policy is preventing a forceful regime change. And this is a fundamental difference between Russia and Iran, because Iranians want Assad regime to stay and they prevent a political resolution. Russian intervention, the reason for the Russian intervention was to prevent the forceful regime change and to allow the space, create an opportunity for a real political reconciliation in the country based on the premise that two sides need to negotiate and without an a priori demand that Assad regime should fall or Assad should step down and so on and so forth. And this prioritization explains the conjuncture of Russian military operations there. When we see that the other parties of this conflict and their outside supporters, including Saudi Arabia, still want a regime change, we fight. As soon as we assume that now there are preconditions for a genuine political resolution, we scale down the military operations. And now we perceive the situation exactly like that. As for what about minority rule or majority, I mean, it is up for Syrians and the crucial regional powers to decide. It's not for us to decide what will be the future government in Syria, but the point is that it should not be imposed from the outside. Neither the United States nor Russia are to take the decisions of who should go and who should stay and what should be the structure of the Syrian government after this crisis is resolved.
Could I add just one sentence to it? How do you know it's minority rule? You assume that it's supported by Shia, but you just assume it. His wife is... Yeah.
Alawi comprise a very small minority of all Syrian population.
Yeah, but he's supported, he may be, I mean, there were several elections. You may call them that they were not true. So they were not real elections. But what basis do you have to say that he is not supported by the majority? There's no basis to it. So, you know, some people are living in mythical society. There's no proof to it. I cannot say it's minority rule, but I cannot say it's for sure that it's majority rule, but you have even less proof to say that it's a minority rule.
I think we could unpack this a lot, but we would then be very deep into the history and politics of modern Syria. I mean, I think the point is that historically it has been viewed as an Alawite rule over the state. I mean, that is
in the press here, but it's not.
Well, not. I wouldn't say in the press, but okay. I mean, let's move on to the next question.
So it's very difficult to compare the policy of the Soviet Union and the policy of the Russian Federation toward Latin America or Caribbean. So Soviet Union was present everywhere, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Russia had to make preferences, and she went in a way out of Latin America. So now there are, most of all, economic interests of our business, of our companies, and if they are attracted by resources, if they are attracted by industrial productions, or they may sell something. So they are there. As far as the relationship with Cuba is concerned, so it was a crisis in our relationship, but nowadays Russia tries to return to Cuba, but the place now is occupied by nearby countries and even by American capital. As far as the Venezuela case is concerned, so here our companies like Rosneft tries to create a chain of production, very large, with India, with Russia, with Venezuela, with other Southeastern countries, because they have their input in the reshuffling of the economy. As far as the more general global approach, so Brazil is a member of BRICS. BRICS is nowadays one of the major informal structure we have in the world, with the participation of major powers from all over the world. It's China, it's India, it's Brazil, it's South Africa, and it's Russia. It's a new vision of the world, but it's not against anybody. It's just to try to recreate an inclusive world with the input of every nation and with the sovereignty and independence of their internal and external policies. And just one small addition: when we held the summit of BRICS in Brazil some years ago, all the leaders of Latin America countries came there just to talk about peaceful cooperation, industrial services, and so on and so forth. But first of all, the importance are economic relations and economic relationship.
May I? Two remarks from economist. One on Syria. It's not a small minority of it. Second, before all these crises, Alawites plus Druzes plus Armenians plus Christians were up to, some time ago, up to 1/2 of the population. Of course, the demography is different, and we are not growing. And what happened in Syria might be, unfortunately, model in Africa next decades. It's very dangerous, because nobody is talking about plus 1 billion people in Africa next quarter century, and nobody talking about what happened to them, how we will be working, feeding, and so on. And in the place Boko Haram is in charge. In Nigeria, agriculture and water goes down. In Syria, there were 5 years of drought. So the Sunni population moved to the line Aleppo, Damascus, before all these cruelties moved them to Turkey. So when we came last year to 15 to Europe, for some people we were the third migration. So climate change may move people to some place, put them in a conflict with local tribes or some political, and after we go next. So we must take care about it. Second, so it's very difficult. No.
12% of Syria.
No, but it's not. If Russians interfered, if we believe to German, I understand pro Latin America. I will be back in a second. If we believe Germans in Israeli reports, it was for a few weeks before regime would go down in Damascus.
Okay, so let's.
I can keep silence. It's not a problem. It's important information. It's normally ignored by everybody. And what you would do about 5 million people on the coast? They would go to Mediterranean because Sunni would push them in the water, and we will be complaining. My God, another 5 million of debt. On Latin America, I was part of all BRICS meetings national BRICS expert meetings. With few years we are working together. It's completely change of minds. We are respecting each other, we growing, we learning each other. Brazilians were completely withdrawn from Asia and Russia. Now we all cooperating. Students go, professors go. It's not immediate. It's not a political bloc, but it's a different road, and BRICS will be influential as a mind-setting, and for neighbors and in between. It will be very important. Don't wait for immediate political measures.
Okay.
Phrases about Syria. So if you respect your own president, Jimmy Carter, just look through his articles, through his reporting in the beginning of the conflict, when he tried to explain to the establishment how he appreciates the peaceful life of different religions and different nations in this country. I don't want to speak about our position, just if you trust Jimmy Carter, look what he wrote about it.
Okay, let's close the Syria topic for the moment and move on to cycles of Asia policy in Russia.
Well, Russia is an Asian country. It's a European country, but it's also an Asian country. 2/3 of the Russian territory lies in Asia. The majority of the population is in the European part, but the majority of resources is in the Asian part. So it's a legitimate part of Asia. But it was seen by its population and by other countries more like a European country. For example, like soccer championship, we play for it. And any sport, we are part of European cups, but not Asian cups. I think it's wrong, but we are going to change it sometime. So anyway, there were several attempts, you are right, to formulate and pursue an active Asian politics. It was under the Tsar, under the Soviet Union. This time, I think, it's happening, it's becoming more serious for several reasons. The first is that, of course, the largest part of our Asian policy is our Chinese policy, because China is our first trading partner, it has a long border, and for many other reasons. And with China, we share our vision of the geopolitics of the world, and our cooperation, I would say, is value-based. It's not in terms of internal politics, but in terms of our common views on international politics. We both China and Russia speaks about democracy in international relations, or in democratization in international relations, which means that all countries should respect each other, they should not use force, they should not impose their model of government on others, and so on. We're against unipolar world, for multipolar world, and so on. So this is one thing. Another thing is that at this time, the West, especially the United States, is seriously helping us. But it pursues a very strange policy of criticizing and alienating both China and Russia at the same time. This was, by the way, a kind of policy that people like Kissinger or Brzezinski and other foreign policy thinkers in the United States warned that one should not do. Nevertheless, you do it. I think it's for ideological reasons, because your country is run by ideology, but this is another story. So basically, you are helping us very much, moving us together. And for a student of China, and I'm a China expert originally, and for an Asia specialist on Asia, I think it's a very positive event, because we have pressed our government for a long time to be serious about Asia, and they did not want to, also for various reasons, because some of officials have their houses in London and not in Beijing. They send their sons and daughters to European countries, not to Korea or Tokyo. And it was very hard, very difficult to persuade them to seriously turn their foreign economic policy and their political attention to Asia. But you helped us a lot. Thank you very much. So this time, I think it's already irreversible.
Already.
One point to these cycles. What makes the current cycle different? Three things, I think. For the first time, Asia-Pacific is the center of gravity in the world. This is first thing, and that makes the Russian pivot to Asia very serious. You have to be there, you have to be in the Pacific, otherwise you will be marginal in world politics. The United States is doing the same, by the way, with Obama's pivot to Asia. Secondly, for the first time, China is not just the trading partner of Russia #1, which Alexander Vladimirovich pointed out, and which is true, but also China is the major economy in the world if we calculate the GDP through purchasing power parity. And three, for the first time in Russian history, our relations with China and the Russian policy towards China no longer depend on the conjuncture and ups and downs of the Russia-Western relations. They have acquired a quality and substance of their own. And even if there will be a new improvement of US-Russia relations under Donald Trump, which I think is quite likely but will be short-lived, it will not result to any kind of downgrade of Russia's relations with China. It will not go at the expense of Russia's relations with China. Thank you.
Let's take another round of questions. Toby, if you could wait for the microphone. Yeah.
Thank you. Toby Gotti. We've seen a vast increase in, I'll start a different way. We've seen a decrease in Western influence and a lot of self-doubt, and you read about it every day. You don't have to go into the issues, which Russia sometimes takes credit for or just benefits from, and that's fine. But the right to be treated as an equal with the U.S. doesn't come from those issues. It comes from the nuclear arsenal, from the military might, and this has been stressed in many cases. But if you look at those issues, for most countries, those issues are irrelevant. The military balance and the nuclear issues. And therefore, you have to look at other things like economics. And in the last year, Russia obviously has not been a model for other countries to grow economically. So my question to you is about Russia's overall strategy. Is it to try to be a first-tier country? And I don't mean just towards the United States, which we tend to focus on because we're Americans. To do that, you would have to restart growth and be an economic power as well. Is it, or is the second alternative to reconcile itself to being a partner with one of the two large economic powers, US and China, and you just, Dmitry mentioned what Russia will do in Asia. Or three, is it to try to create new institutions in which we throw out whatever we have and we build something new? If you look at Trump, he's not taking Russia seriously as an economic power. Actually, he's offering relief of sanctions because he sees this as Russia's great weakness, that it needs those sanctions reduced. So the only issues that are important are ISIS and nuclear reductions and Miss Universe pageants, I don't know. So what is it? If you look at those three alternatives, how does Russia want to be taken seriously by the rest of the world?
Let's take two more questions in the back.
I'm Stanley Kober. I was in Moscow for a conference in 1990 at the Academy of Sciences. I was particularly inspired by one of the presentations of a Soviet panelist. And he said, "We will now be part of a global civilization, stretching from New York to London to Paris to Moscow. One global civilization." The Berlin Wall had just come down a few months before. It was still the Soviet Union, but one global civilization. I look back at that now and wonder what happened. Would it be possible to recreate that? What would it take to recreate that?
Alrighty, let's take one more question in the back on the other side.
Thank you. John Sullivan. I have a long relationship with the Russian Chamber, Sergei Katerin and others there, including Evgeny Primakov. And they have a very defined image of Russian business and economic interests in the world, which are a more open and inclusive trading order. Do you feel that that is still the overall Russian goal? And if it is, how will they deal with a Trump administration which may not share that idea? We just had a lecture from Xi Jinping in Davos where he was talking about globalization and quoting the need for free trade and global issues, which I'm hoping the U.S. administration is listening to. But what would be the Russian speech in Davos? How would you talk about these issues of globalization, free trade, and international economics?
Great, good set of questions. A little heavy on the economy.
Let me take the first one. Actually, the two questions are connected. One is what Russia wants to be, and the second one is if it wants to be part of world civilization, or if such thing exists. So I would say that our journal actually is devoted to these questions. Well, it is quite clear that Russia in the 1990s saw the world as one civilization, or it is that there was a major Western civilization, and it wanted to be a part of it, maybe even not an equal partner, but a junior partner of some more developed countries. But later, after it was not accepted by the Western world, and there are many reasons for that, the government and also the majority of the population supports this idea that Russia should be an independent center in the emerging multipolar world. The Russian plan of creating of becoming such a center, we can see it from its efforts to support the Eurasian integration, Eurasian Economic Union, for example. But whether it can really become one, I think it's an open question now, because as Tsobi, whom I didn't see at first, so is right that economic situation is not very bad, but it's not maybe not good enough to for it to support this project economically. But about economy, I think we have a very good one of our best economists, and he'll tell us if Russia can become such a center from the economic point of view. As the world civilization, I would say that Russia is a part of world civilization, because it depends what you call world civilization. If you mean by that kind of its western part, then Russia is not part of it, and it can, I don't think it will ever become part of it. But the western part is in crisis at the moment, and we don't even wish to be part of it. But there are other countries. China is part of world civilization. From one point of view, it is. It's part of world economy. It's one of the strongest part of world economy. Even culturally, China is Chinese language of science is absolutely kind of Western. They don't use their 19th century language there. They don't wear 19th century clothes, and they think as a contemporary people. But at the same time, it's not part of the specific mode of political, I would say of political system or regime, Western type. So from that point of view, everybody is now part of world civilization. Even Mr. Kim Jong-un says that his country is democratic, and he wears a suit or whatever he does wear. I don't know, but it's certainly not a traditional. It's the traditional Korean clothes. But on the other hand, the civilization. The civilization is united in many ways, but it's not united and will never be united as a political model. In a way, I even compared it with period of Hellenism, when all the existing world at that time were similar to Greece, but despite that, culture was very similar, but at the same time, different countries still were at war with each other, and they were very different. So, in saying this, I would ask other people. Professor Grigoriev, could you tell us something about if Russia can become a separate center of power in the multipolar world from the point of view of its economics?
Not, of course not. We are an open economy. We have huge dependence on export, especially on oil and financially. The financial shock of 2015 was minus $150 billion cash. So the same amount of exported oil in tons and minus $50 billion. So no country except Russia would sustain it. We sustained huge blow, unbelievable, and much better than we sustained the crisis of 2008-9 or 1998. People adjusted. We had a substantial consumer boom before this crisis. In 5 years of high oil, this oil rent went to pensioners, defense, export of capital on different levels, and huge consumer durables boom. Change it with stock. We documented it recently. We cannot be independent power because that was done in this social bloc, but it was a billion people with Germans and Czech working as a manufacturing farm. So it was balanced in a very specific way. It was division, a huge, people don't notice now, it was a huge planned division of labor between countries. We produce only few things. We produce brains. We exported about 2 million people with high education in recent years. Total commercial success on the West. No Russian plumbers in Europe, no Russian meat cutters, no Russian bus drivers, only intellectuals. So Russians abroad is a professional global middle class. So we keep producing brains, we're producing weapons, much better than ours, not because it's about the same result, but it's much simpler in handling. That's history of Russian weapons. It's much simpler in learning and handling. We're producing nuclear, a little bit pharmacology, some sophisticated nuclear power stations. We're returning to space. Plus agriculture, forests, paper, timber, grain, water, and so on. So we don't produce anything in between. We don't produce shoes. We don't produce, so we don't produce good consumer goods. We never did it. We cannot compete with Germans on manufacturing, on machinery. Of course, it's history, it's background. We cannot produce, we cannot compete with Chinese, now not with Chinese, but more with Vietnamese, Indonesian, all these countries, which are beating now Chinese on low-intensive goods, labor-intensive goods, and it's freight. Low-intensive goods, it's a new invention. So we cannot do it. We don't have cheap labor. We have clever labor. We have fighting labor, because we never had peace. The country, for the last 1,000 years, never had peace at all. Let me remind you that we never had chivalry. Nobody was picking another person by wooden stick, because Russian nobility was guarding south borders against nomads for hundreds of years, every year from April to October. By Khrushchevsky, it took 85,000 military people every year for millennium, before machine guns, and before Catherine the Great. So it's completely different mentality. It's completely the structure of labor force. Foreign professors who are teaching in High School of Economics, with us, most of us here teaching in High School of Economics, we're amazed by our students. In our department, we mostly represent here, we have a choice of 8 languages. So all students teach 4 years English and 4 years choice of Korean, Chinese, Japanese, Arabic, German, French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese. Plus all the economics, plus all the politics. Come on, we keep producing people. And that's how it's about, it's my article in this magazine, which was mentioned, basically about it. It's a very strange mix, but it's a luxury of biodiversity on the globe. We're absolutely part of a global civilization and economy. The whole day here, I'm talking to my friends, American friends, giving explanation about Russian energy mostly. And I was asked, okay, what about your information in Russia? I said, well, we have all the CNN, Fox News, together on the same screen. All the internet. We have foreign TV. We know English. Most of educated Russians know some English and can read and can watch TV and can watch the news. We have 1 million people here in the United States, 1,300,000 in Berlin, 300,000 in London. Relatives, young people communicating with us. And plus we know Russian. And when it's Russian affairs discussed, we know everything what is written and said about us in original language, not through Russian propaganda, but in the original. More of that, Russian propaganda channel SMI, SMI means foreign media, foreign media. What it's doing it's very efficient and very cost-saving. Every cruel word, and especially very stupid things said about us in English or in English, immediately translated by our official propaganda into Russian and published on internet. For Russians, read it, please, what this idiot writing about us. It's very cost-saving. Propaganda is very shrewd about it. It just, and we know Russian. It's luxury, not necessarily in the United States, but it's kind of gives us a feeling we are part of the globe because of English, information, and trade and everything, plus we know Russian. Thank you. Sorry. It's information globalization, trade globalization, people globalization, and financial globalization, just because we receive money for our oil. We don't have much developed financial sector.
Yeah, also actually a couple of words about globalization and to what extent Russia wants to be part of the global world, to what extent Russia wants to be a separate something in between. In the 90s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia absolutely not thinking accepted all the rules which were not written for the Russian economy, not for the Russian financial system, and simply not for the Russian national interest. Right now, or for some while already, Russia is rethinking that. Nobody talks about isolationism or separation. First, it's impossible. Secondly, it's stupid. But it is believed that rules, international rules, trade rules, they were written by people and nations in their interest, and Russia wants to adjust them to what extent possible to her interests. For example, I don't quite understand why Russia adopted free movement of capital. It creates much more problems for us than gains. Yeah? I don't quite understand why it took Russia 25 years to understand that moderate subsidies to local agriculture make sense because everybody else subsidizes the agriculture. Russia is not very happy. BRICS was mentioned in a different relationship. BRICS originally was, well, founded around financial issue, about the desire of some countries to adjust to the rules of IMF and world financial system. And it still remains, nobody's making a revolution or something, but the work is being done in that direction. Shadow institutions are being created. Here, IMF, we're not happy with how IMF works, so parallel to it, there will be a pool of currencies by BRICS. We're not happy with the policies of the World Bank. Okay, there will be something else. Russia is absolutely not thinking of isolationism, and all this war of sanctions will end sooner or later. But our policies are becoming more mercantilistic. Yeah? And in that sense, it will be interesting to see if there will be any economic dialogue between the new American administration and Russia, because they seem to look. Each is looking at the situation from its own side, but the mode of thinking is much closer today than it was with the previous one. I mean, the logic is the same. So no isolationism, no revolutions, but taking care of national interest, including financial interest, including technical interest, including engineering interest, including such things. So, thank you.
Just one point on Toby Gatti's question, which is, I think, very important one. Toby, I think both military and economy are absolutely necessary, and of course I accept that Russia is not very strong on the economic part and is unlikely to be in the observable future, but I would disagree with the proposition that military power, nukes and so on are irrelevant. I mean, tell this to Israelis, tell this to Koreans, tell this to Ukrainians. I mean, they will profoundly disagree. On the contrary, now the tendency of the development of the international system is such that the importance of military power is rising again. I mean, you could speculate on the relevance of military power in the conditions of the unchallenged American global hegemony. It's over. We are in a period where outright and open great power competition is again normal. It's just a normal of international relations. It necessitates the importance of military power. We are in a process of profound transformation of the Middle East, the destination of which is unknown and which will take place which will take decades. This necessitates the importance of military power. We have a looming military competition between China and the United States that necessitates the role of military power, and so on and so forth. And in the meantime, I think it will be enough for Russia, taking into account the Russian already accomplished military modernization, Syria, and the Russian nuclear stockpile, which is quite modern nowadays and which will continue to be modernized, as a sufficient and enough reason for Russia to be for Russia to present itself and promote itself as an independent power center. Thank you.
May I also add one little thing? It's very common to talk about Russian economic weakness. Everybody tells that. And there is a lot of truth in that. At the same time, I would remind you that Russia, on different years, it's either the 6th or the 7th economy of the world. Way bigger than France, way bigger than Britain. We were about to catch up with Germany, but the recent recession prevented us from doing this. Of course, we will always economically be significantly smaller than China, significantly smaller than the United States, smaller than Japan, and smaller than India, which is growing very fast. But I wouldn't over-exaggerate the Russian economic weakness. Things are not excellent, but not that bad.
All right, let's take another round of questions. Here in front.
Thank you for coming here. I am Maija Härkönen, Director of the Center for the Study of Democracy at St. Mary's College of Maryland. It's always refreshing to hear opinions of Russians here in DC. I have visited the country many, many times, and coming from Finland, we have had very interesting, unique, and very collaborative relations with Russia for a long time. And we would like to keep it that way. Now, however, Russians have been violating the airspace of the Scandinavian countries. The Estonians have been subjected to cyber attacks. The security in the Baltic area has become worse, and it hasn't really served Russia's strategic interests, because the neutral countries of Finland and Sweden have become closer to NATO, and they have started increasing their military spending and considering Russia as a main enemy. Is that something that you have been looking forward to building up, or is that just a little detour that will at some point find its more peaceful resolution?
All right. Oliver, behind you.
Thank you. I'm Leon Weintraub, retired U.S. diplomat. I'd like to ask you about the Paris Peace Conference on the Middle East that just occurred. Since the final communique reiterated support for a negotiated solution with two states, I'm wondering, what did Russia see as the point of the conference? What did the world get out of this conference? What was said that was not said before? And does Russia have any expectations that this conference will lead to anything that we haven't seen before? And what was the point of Russia attending the conference?
Okay, and right behind.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Tori Tausig from the Brookings Institute. I have a question about the kind of domestic context of Russian foreign policy. We've talked a lot about geostrategic concerns, great power competition, and yet there are always kind of domestic factors that interact with kind of international challenges and opportunities. So I'm wondering if you can talk more to kind of the political aspects playing a role in foreign policy decision-making. I mean, as an outsider, should we be looking to understand Putin's worldview and thinking, or are there certain elite issues or interests that we should be focused on or paying attention to as well? If we could talk about those types of domestic issues, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for your question. I mean, if we, you know, one of the things that I think Russia must do in terms of changing its foreign policy in the cause of establishing more normal and less confrontational relations with the United States and NATO is to change the style of its behavior in the Baltic Sea region. You know, flights without transponders, violating airspace of the neighbors, especially the neighbors like Sweden and Finland, who are not NATO member states. I don't think that these things are doing good for the Russia's foreign policy and Russian image. So, well, you know, you have to be balanced and careful here, because there is, I mean, I'm not rejecting that Russia is doing that, and I'm an opponent, not proponent of this kind of behavior of Russia in the Baltic Sea region, because it goes against the Russian narrative, which I think is correct, that Russia is not trying to attack the Baltic states, and Russia will not use the Ukrainian model and pattern in the Baltic Sea region, that Russia will not conduct a hybrid whatever operations in the against NATO member states, including the Baltic states, and Russia is not trying to return them into the some kind of Russian sphere of influence or destroy NATO. So I think that this kind of behavior needs to be stopped, needs to be reversed. But at the same time, I think you should not also underestimate the role of the Baltic states themselves. You know, they are interested in presenting the Russian threat and talking about the Russian threat in order to attract military presence from the United States, assurance measures, the results of the Warsaw Summit, or the NATO Warsaw Summit results quite recently, and so on. They have been demanding and yielding for this permanent presence of the United States since 1990s. I mean, and now they have the pretext, and they got it. So I won't blame Russia only, but Russia is of course not behaving good when it violates airspace of the of the countries in the Baltic Sea region. And I mean, there is not a lot what Russia could do in terms of change of its foreign policy when it comes to establishing better relations with the United States under the Trump administration, but this precisely is something that Russia, I think, ought to do.
The Arab-Israeli conflict is a complicated conflict which many people tried to solve, and nobody was successful. The official Russian position is, of course, that Russia is against new settlements, new Israeli settlements, and from that point of view it supports, well, most countries, because even the United States at least did not block the Security Council resolution on this question. But on the other hand, we understand that, well, Israel is also a partner of Russia, a very close partner. We don't need visas to go to Israel. You know, like 1/4 of the population is Russian-speaking. Approximately, or maybe more. So we understand that this question cannot be solved without the participation of the Israeli government. And if you put too much pressure on Israel, then the more rightist it becomes. The more pressure you put on it, the more rightist it becomes. So it's not a Russian war. So I think that Russia should not care about everybody, just like the United States does. Because, you know, the Soviet Union tried to care about everything in the world, and it collapsed finally. I'm not sure what happens with the United States, but I hope it doesn't. So also it already has some problems. So so you see, but generally we think that Russia is part of the peaceful process. What's it called? The quartet. The yes, and it's actively participating. But we basically think that the parts of the conflict should come to some kind of agreement.
So let's deal with Syria first.
Yeah.
That's something that is really acute nowadays, and we do have a window of opportunity under the Trump administration, because we are likely to have a more commonality of threat perceptions, of understanding who are terrorist organizations, what are behind them under Trump, than we did have under Obama. So let's deal with Syria first. A political resolution of the Syrian conflict will allow us to move towards counterterrorism. And after that, we can seriously take upon Arab-Israeli conflict, hypothetically, but we will not do that because the Trump administration will be uninterested to do that.
That's right.
Yes.
That's about the reason for the Paris Peace Conference at this time.
Well, but that's a diplomatic inertia. I mean, it's going on, but I do not see any interest of the Trump administration to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict in accordance with the roadmap. And roadmap is the widely accepted pattern. So we'll probably have a pause over the next 4 years, if Trump is not impeached before. But I mean, what happens later, I mean, it will, and whether we are able to cooperate on that will depend, I think, on the other issues of our relations in the broader Middle East. Iran, by the way, is another impediment. We do expect the Trump administration to conduct a more adversarial policy towards Iran, and this will, of course, also undermine our capabilities to cooperate on the Arab-Israeli conflict, right? Russia perceives, well, Russia has close relations with Israel, but at the same time we perceive Iran as a very important partner, right? And we will not join the United States in containing Iran or revising the Iranian nuclear deal, or even declaring Hezbollah and the Iranian political regime as a part of the problem of radical Islamism in the Middle East, as Michael Flynn and James Mattis are doing. And if you allow, very briefly on the third question, domestic aspects, you know, they are important, but you shouldn't overestimate them. You know, we usually play the following game with our American counterparts within a working group on U.S.-Russia relations that Jeff Mankoff is a part of. We put the discussion, let's say, the sources of the Russian conduct and the sources of American conduct, and ask the Russians to talk about the sources of both, and the Americans to talk about the sources. When the Russians talk about the sources of Russian and American conduct, they talk about distribution of power in the international system, threat perceptions, and so on and so forth. Americans are talking about the role of Congress, who participates in the administration, and and so on and so forth. And this is the paradigm. And we understand that it's your paradigm that for you domestic politics is the major driver, maybe, or one of the major drivers of foreign policy. It's not the case with Russia. Why Putin's foreign policy is so popular, and there is a consensus, by the way, in Russia, not because of the Russian propaganda, but because Putin's foreign policy course really resonates with the opinion of elites and the predominant opinion of the majority of the people about the Russian foreign policy. I mean, foreign policy is not the way, or it's not the major, reason to consolidate domestic support and you know, so on and so forth. If it were the case, we should, I mean, we should have welcomed Hillary Clinton, because Hillary Clinton administration would be the perfect pretext for Russia, you know, to talk about hostile encirclement, you know, and confrontation with the United States as the means to consolidate the people around the regime and so on and so forth. We did not do that, right? And we really would like to have more fruitful relations with the United States and cooperation on the issues where our national interests combine. So it's not about Putin's mobilization of his domestic constituency and elites around himself. It's not about hostile encirclement. That's a mistake. And if you think that Putin is the major engine for the Russian foreign policy course, which leads you to another conclusion that you need to get rid of Putin and Russian policy will improve, you are fundamentally wrong.
It can become even more anti-Western, actually.
Absolutely.
If we have another elections or something. So I wanted to add something on Syria. On Syria. As you remember, Syria was the last country which did not want to come to an agreement with Israel. So I have an idea that maybe the United States disliked it, not actually because it was very non-democratic or authoritarian, because, I mean, you deal very well with many other non-democratic countries. Like, if Syria is authoritarian, what do we say about Saudi Arabia, for example, where women cannot drive a car, and for theft, they cut your right arm. So maybe this was one of the reasons. So about Putin, Putin is very popular, and I thought about why he was popular, because it's actually a phenomenon. He has been popular for more than 15 years already, while other Russian presidents or Soviet presidents, like Gorbachev, was popular for 2 or 3 years, then people began to hate him. The same was with Yeltsin. In the end, Yeltsin's popularity was like 5%, and Putin is always more than 60%. Actually, when he came to power, he got only 50-something%, but then it became much higher. I think that Putin, in a way, is the Russian Trump. Because Trump
will stay for 15 years.
Well, not necessarily, because
if we judge by the coverage.
Well, wait, Trump's election we see it not just in any kind of election, but as a rebellion of a certain strata of the US population, like workers in manufacturing-related jobs, the residents of outlying areas, small towns and medium-sized cities, against the idealized urban elite and university-educated elite. Well, from that point of view, Putin understood that majority, you can base your power on this kind of majority much earlier. So if you go to major Russian cities like Moscow or St. Petersburg, Putin is much less popular there than among the majority of the population from small cities, from, it's interesting that people who became to live much better under Putin actually are against him. But people who live worse, they support Putin, much more of them support Putin. The popularity of Putin among them is much higher than in the major prosperous cities, and I think this is exactly because his policies, both conservative policies inside the country, internally, and foreign policy, is really supported by the population. You know, we had a lot of regimes which were alien which were alien to the people. You know, the Tsarist regime, some people even wrote that in Tsarist Russia there were two peoples. You know, the aristocracy, which even spoke different language from the peasants. You know, you can eliminate aristocracy and change the policy. Communism, you know, the communist elite, nobody really understood what they were talking about. You know, all this communist theoretical nonsense. You know, you eliminate them, not even physically, but just to put them somewhere else, move them from power. You change the policy. Now you cannot change the policy. This is a real people's power. You change Putin, there will be another one, the same as him, or even, or probably even less, even more anti-Western, because you know this is the mood of the people at the moment. This is no propaganda. Of course, propaganda plays some role, but not decisive role. I'll tell you that in the late Soviet time, I still remember it. The entire propaganda was pro-Brezhnev, but nobody really took Brezhnev seriously. I mean, Brezhnev was a joke. Who was Brezhnev? You know? And now we don't even have jokes about Putin because he is serious. I've never heard a joke about Putin.
Oh, of course.
Nor will you hear one right now.
Please, Professor Grigoriev.
Come on, what does it mean? We had this special site, Vladimir Vladimirovich, we had books of jokes about Putin published. And it's nobody cared. I can tell you the first joke about Putin, I remember when he just came to power before any events. Putin is opening a refrigerator, and it's meat jelly on the plate, shaking because of a movement of refrigerator. And he says, "Don't worry, I'm just for ketchup." It was very well. Now, a couple more things. One is we are not anti-Western country. I am afraid it's a terminology not applicable. Anti-Western, what is considered anti-Western policies is one thing. We are living in this world. You cannot find anti-Western people in intellectuals, and we don't agree with certain things West doing about us. So it's yes, but it doesn't mean we are. Now, who is filling European museums? Who is in Chartres? Who is in Louvre? You are visiting the Museum of Gaudi in Spain, and who is in the museum? 12 Russians, 2 French. It's not anti-Western. Policies is a separate story.
2 days ago, there was a fight in the queue in Moscow. It was a line for Museum of European Art.
Yeah.
Okay, should we take one last round of questions before we run out of time?
Olga, I just...
But it's just we're going to run out of time, and it would be nice to get a few more people, give them a chance to ask questions, if you don't mind, Professor. Just, okay. Let's take, you're saying we are out of time? Okay, we actually are out of time. We'll ask, then I'll ask our panelists to close up. I will say for myself that they took over this journal, and now they've taken over our podium for an hour and a half, and it's always very important to hear the perspectives from actual Russians. So I really appreciate them coming out and doing this. So
well, thank you very much for coming. I hope you read this journal and other journals, and we're preparing actually and the next issue, which will be more international, not only Russian authors, but from several other countries, including Americans. So it's a good journal.